We've been going through the Gospel of John, and so far we've talked about 4 of the signs in the Gospel of John. John calls them signs more so than miracles. They're signs that Jesus is using, according to John's Gospel, to prove that he is the Son of God and he is the Messiah. You know, we talked about turning the water to wine, one of the most famous stories in the Bible. We talked about the healing of the Roman official's son from 16 miles away. Then we talked about the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda, just outside the sheep gate on the north end of Jerusalem. And last week we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. Today we're going to go to the next sign in John's Gospel. It's a story that's told in Matthew, Mark, and John. It's not in the book of Luke. And Matthew's story of this one is a little different than Mark's and John's. Only in Matthew does it tell about Peter getting out of the boat to walk to Jesus, because we're going to talk about Jesus walking on the water. Something we all wish we could do at times, isn't it? You know, that to me is probably the most interesting of Jesus' miracles, the walking on the water, if you think about that. That's something that I bet people, if you think, oh, I wish I could fly, I wish I could do this. And then you think, well, I wish I could walk on water, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just something that you think is an unusual miracle. But, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself right here, but I'm going to ask you something. Do you have any idea maybe what the point was Jesus was trying to make by walking on the water? Remembering that in the book of John, he's doing these signs to prove he is the Messiah, the Son of God. His point by walking on the water was to prove that he controlled all of God's creations. He can even control the water. And he proved it another time when he calmed the storm, remember? So I thought maybe that's why Jesus was walking on the water, but I'm going to tell you another reason in a few minutes. So now Mark and John don't talk about Peter, but I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes and what I talk about. Do y'all know why Jesus could not walk on water after he was crucified? He had holes in his feet. That was bad, I know. That was bad. Lynn doesn't approve of that one. But
You might start running these jokes for Lynn before you.
Yeah, I know. That was okay. Before I get into the story of walking on the water, though, I want to talk about something that happened after the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus fed, and it was probably 10 to 12,000. Those of you who were here last week remember that the 5,000 was just the men. Mm-hmm. It didn't include the women and the children. As a matter of fact, in Matthew, it says 5,000 men plus the women and the children. So it could have been 10 to 12,000 or more that he fed. Immediately after that, most of those people left. Matthew also tells us that Jesus healed all of them. They got what they wanted, didn't they? And they left him. And I can imagine how he felt about that. As a matter of fact, he felt so bad about it, he told his disciples, he says, y'all go down there and get in that boat and go out into the Sea of Galilee. I need to be alone for a few minutes or a while, ever how long. He needed to be alone because most of those people walked away from him and left him after he had healed them and then fed them. And they left. He knew also that those people were ready to capture him, basically take him to Jerusalem and make him the king of the Jews, which was not God's plan, and Jesus knew that. So he knew that could not happen. And that's another reason he went away from them to have some quiet time by himself. But basically only the 12 disciples remained, and Jesus then sent them away and said, probably said, I need to be alone for a little while. Y'all get in the boat and go out into the Sea of Galilee. And we've talked a lot about the Sea of Galilee. Jesus spent a lot of time around the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias, also called the Sea of Gennesaret. It's in the northern end of the Jordan River, up in the north end of Israel. The maps in there will show you where it is. The Sea of Galilee was about 6 miles wide and 10 miles long, probably that's 32,000 acres. So it's 5 times the size of Caney Lake. So it's a pretty good sized lake, but nothing like Lake Michigan or anything like that, you know, but it is a pretty good sized lake. So Jesus has sent the disciples away, and now Chris is going to read John 6:16 through 20.
That evening his disciples went down to the shore to wait for him. But as darkness fell and Jesus still hadn't come back, they got into the boat and headed out across the lake toward Capernaum. Soon a gale swept down upon them as they rowed, and the sea grew very rough. They were 3 to 4 miles out when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on water towards the boat. They were terrified, but he called out to them, "I am here, don't be afraid."
Thank you, Chris. Okay, there's several things there. It says they head out across the lake going to Capernaum. Capernaum's up on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. So they were either on the southern end of the sea or on the eastern side, and they were going across to Capernaum. A trip of, depending on from where they came from, anywhere from 6 to 10 miles, probably. And they were 4 miles out into the water. And a strong wind started blowing. Remember I told you the Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake in the world. It's over 600 feet below sea level. On the northern end are mountains. On the southern end is more flat plains. The warm air blows up, and people in Louisiana will understand this. The warm air blows up from the south. The cool air blows down from the mountains, and it gets together, and it causes the lake to be very rough. And it happens quickly. It just like a hurricane or a storm that blows up here, a lot of times it's caused by the warm, moist air coming from the Gulf and the cool air coming from the north, and they clash together, and it causes storms. And that happens on the Sea of Galilee quite often, and that's what happened this evening when the disciples were in a boat out on the water. And it also says that they were frightened. You know, at first, they thought it was a ghost. I think it's in Matthew and Mark. I think it tells us they thought they were seeing a ghost walk across the water. I don't even know if they knew what a ghost was. You know, it's just that in the Bible, in the English translation that we have, it calls it a ghost. They thought that they were seeing a ghost. And then they cried out to him, and Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. It is I." That was his answer to their fear. Now, you know, I told you that John talks about 7 miracles in his gospel, but I found another one that I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say this about the very next verse that Chris did not read. I started to call you Jesus, Chris. He read through verse 20, but in verse 21 it says, "Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going." That sounds like a miracle to me, doesn't it? Instead of being 4 to 5 miles out to sea, immediately that boat and those 13 people on it, counting Jesus, were in Capernaum. Doesn't that sound, that very possibly could have been another miracle, but it's not ever called one, but it's what it says. You know, and they were out on the water, and immediately they were where they were headed to. So I think that's actually another of Jesus' miracles that you never hear talked about. Now I told you that Matthew is a little different because Matthew tells about Peter. Well, they see Jesus coming, they're afraid. They have fear. Not only because of the storm, because they see this, what they thought was an apparition coming toward them. They thought he was a ghost. And Jesus is walking toward them, and they're afraid. And Peter, when he finally realizes after Jesus says, "It's I," Peter, "Oh, okay, that's our Lord. That's Jesus." Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus simply says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat, starts walking toward Jesus, and y'all know what happened. He gets scared. Fear overtakes him. He looks at the water. He takes his eyes off of Jesus, looks at the water. He gets afraid, and he sinks. And immediately he calls out to Jesus. And immediately, Jesus pulls him out of the water and saves him from drowning. And then after Jesus saves him, after, not before, after Jesus saves him, Jesus says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" You've heard me say the word immediately several times. In Matthew and Mark, the word immediately is used several times in telling this story. Immediately, Jesus told the disciples to go down and get in the boat. Immediately, Jesus reached down and pulled Peter out of the water. It's used several times in their telling of the story. Immediately after what? Jesus tells the disciples to go down to get in the boat. Immediately after what? Well, immediately after feeding the 5,000 and the people start to leave. He didn't wait. I guess Jesus is not one that likes to wait for things to happen. You know, if he'd have waited and looked at Peter flailing in the water there and says, "Well, Peter, why don't you have any faith?" Instead, immediately, Jesus helped Peter out of the water. He didn't wait. There was no time after he fed the 5,000. There was no time to celebrate that great miracle, to do any more ministering, to relax and enjoy what happened. He told the disciples, "Go, get in the boat and leave." And the disciples, I can imagine that wasn't easy for them. I mean, they're there to help Jesus, to take care of him. And he's telling them that, no, go get in the boat and go out in the water. I don't need you. I don't think he said that, but he was pretty much telling them, right now, I need to be alone. I need to think about this myself. I don't need you here with me. And they go out in the boat, and immediately the boat starts getting rocked by the waves, and they get afraid. They're far from land, and they don't know what they're going to do. We've all been there, haven't we? We've all been in that boat. We've all been caught up in life's storms, battered by circumstances beyond our control. We've all been afraid because of those storms and those things that have happened to us. We've all been far from the safety of home at some time or another. We never know what's going to happen next. None of us get to go through this life unbattered. None of us get to go through this life without those storms at one time or another. It's going to happen to all of you. I'm sure it has already happened to all of you more than once. And it's going to happen to you again, whether it be cancer or anything else. You know, back surgery, things are going to happen where you will be to the point where you're afraid. They come immediately, without warning. And Jesus is always there. He's always with us during those times. He wants us to walk out to him. He's always there with us in those times. He may not immediately calm your storm or take care of you or heal you, but he wants you to call out to him just as Peter did as he was sinking. He wants you to do that because he knows that you are going to have times in your life where you're battered, you're down, and you don't know what to do. And those are the times when Jesus wants to be in your life. He wants you to call out to him so he can immediately come to you and take care of you. He's ready for you to do that. So when you're in those times, call out to God. When life's storms hit and you're in fear, don't wait. Call. I've told you in the past what that means, where it says call out to God. It means literally, just like Peter did, I'm sure. Call out to God. Let him hear you. That's what that means. And that's what Jesus wants you to do. And being afraid doesn't mean you don't have faith. There's nothing wrong with being afraid. Marcy, I ask you, you're starting a new job. It's got to be a little fear there. Chris, there's got to be a little fear every time you get on a roof, especially like one like this, And Marcy, your family selling their home place and moving to a new area. There's got to be some fear there. Dwight, with your back surgery. I'm sure there was some fear there. And Cheryl, for you also. You know, I can only imagine the fear that Roy and Terry are going through with Roy's bad leg now broken in another spot. We all have fears and those storms that come up in our lives. And during those times, Jesus wants you to call out to him, to cry out to him like Peter did. And regardless of how faithful or unfaithful you are in that moment, he will immediately catch you. That's what this is all about. Jesus walked on the water to get to his disciples. Sure, he walked on the water to show that he was the Son of God and could control that element of creation. But he also walked on the water to show them that no matter how fearful you are, here I come. Here I am. I'm here. Come to me. Call out to me. I'm here to help you. So how's your faith? How does your faith stand up in your fears? You know, it's not easy. When you've got problems and things going wrong and worries, it's not easy to continue in your faith and call on God and call on Jesus at those times. How does your faith measure up when you get in situations like that? Linda, when Ellis died, how did your faith stand up? When I found out I had cancer, there was a moment. And then I realized I need to give this to God. When Madeline was born, there was a moment. But then I found out I have to give this to God. I have to call out on God to help me. And that's what we need to do. Are you going to sink? So if your boat's a little battered right now, take heart. If you're far away from the safety of land or home, don't be afraid. If you've taken your eyes off of Jesus for a moment, open those eyes back up and look at Jesus. He's coming to you in that storm, and all he wants you to do is call out to him because he wants to be with you. As a matter of fact, he's always with you. He's always there. He's always in that boat with you. He's always in that storm with you. He's always there to keep you from drowning by a loss of faith. Jesus is there in your fears. Reach out to him, and he will immediately help you and save you. Amen.